Hey everyone, I think we had an audio issue earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and recap what I was talking about. We're diving in today with three areas of storytelling that is almost kind of thinking outside of the box of the typical kind of business storytelling that you will find uh, in the traditional setting. So, and by traditional, I mean somebody comes in as a coach, as a trainer, and they're going to go ahead and guide a team, whether if it's executive or a group of individuals, in the corporate space, to understand how it is that they can present better, or how it is that they can lead or manage better by using and leveraging the power of storytelling. Now, remember, we talked about this before. Storytelling, especially in the business realm, is not just or it doesn't have to be at all a once upon a time kind of framework. And so I think it's very important to see the difference in that. Now, what I'm going to do is before we get started, I just want to go ahead and make sure that my screen is going to be shared, because we are going to be looking, and I'm going to hide this while we talk, because you don't need to see that just yet. Okay, so yeah, so the approach that I take for business storytelling is on two sides. The first side is the corporate brand messaging side, where the entity itself, the business itself, needs to communicate value and needs to talk about what it is that it does to a particular group of people, to its customer segments. And so what they have to do is, obviously, the value proposition and all of those pieces need to come together so that the other person, or the people on the other side, can say, oh, wow, I can see the value to that. But here's the key. The caveat is, you're not using services and features and the how-tos and what you're doing in order to try to win them over. What you're doing is you're taking a persona of an individual who would go through a process, go through using a product, or go through the service, and your potential prospects, your leads, they can see themselves in that narrative, and they say, wow, well, if he or if she can actually be transformed by using their service or their product, then I have to have it. It's infrequent, that you don't need to try to win people over. And as a matter of fact, you don't even need to try to do so. It just doesn't work. The people aren't going to gravitate towards you unless it's more so like design oriented or visual based. They're not going to be drawn towards you because of the tool itself, but it's how is the tool going to solve my problem? How is the tool going to transform me or transform the business? An old saying, right? People, when they're hiring somebody to put holes in their wall, right? They don't really care about the kind of hammer or the nails that are being used. They just need the hole in the wall, right? That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that value. Anyway, so that's the first side. The other side now is dealing with internal. So we talked about external brand messaging from a corporate side, from an entity side, how it is that they communicate. But now there's the other side, which is internally. How does a manager, or maybe a middle manager, or some sort of C-level executive, or some sort of director, how do they communicate to their team, to other individuals, or maybe in a presentation, to help people to make either a buying decision that isn't just about maybe change management, or to adopt a new, I don't know, maybe some sort of funding for a new project, but maybe it's just for them to sustain the culture of productivity. Right? Maybe it's to boost morale. And the point here is that you still use the power of storytelling to do the same thing. And you don't do it by just shooting off a persuasive email that communicates, what the business is about and where we are and how it's more nuanced than that, because first you have to understand who you're connecting with. You have to understand the temperature, let's use the word temperature. You have to understand what's actually going on in the actual business itself, so that within your team, how is it that they can trust me? What story do I need to tell so that they can trust me, and then I can lead them? Listen, people want to follow people who have the skin in the game. And that's where this whole idea of storytelling can come in, where it really bridges the gap between the other person and the truth. There's this old quote that says, the shortest distance between a human and the truth is a story. And that's so true. Anyway, guys, so let's now dive into how does this connect to people who's working from home? Like, you're not in the corporate space, you're not you haven't really left your home just yet, or maybe you have, but it's not as frequent. and you're trying to figure out, well, how does storytelling even fit into what we're talking about? So let's take a look here. I'm going to just push this over right quick, and we're going to look at this in three creative ways. So I think the last time that we discussed working from home, I mentioned some nuances on how I creatively have found a way to revisit how I even have crafted my own space and all of this in order to kind of shape a narrative that helps me myself in the work from home culture. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at storytelling, and this is unconventional. This isn't something that's in a book. It's really just personal experiences that hopefully going to help individuals who are also in the work from home culture. We're going to look at this in an unconventional way in three different types. So think of storytelling as either earth, right? The elements of earth. Think of storytelling as water, or think of storytelling as wind. Okay, there we go. Earth, water, or wind. And why am I saying this? Because the first storytelling, and let me just move up here so that we can move to the next slide here. The first example of storytelling deals with earth. And we're going to take a look at relationships. Now, why is that important? That's important because when I just kind of scrolling up here, when I think of earth, I think of the creation of the world. So for those of you who believe in the creationist theory, this is going to resonate with you, where the waters was the spirit was hovering over the waters of the deep, right? The face of the deep. So there were the elements of earth, and there were the elements of atmosphere or water, vapor. Everything was kind of in a chaos, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and so for me, my understanding of that first verse is He created all of the elements for heaven, atmosphere, water, and all of the elements that is going to that was needed to create earth. But it's all in this discombobulated, chaotic form. And then light appears, and then he starts to separate. He starts to separate water from land, and he starts to kind of sculpt the earth, and it's now having boundaries. And so here it is where I'm thinking of storytelling, and when we're looking at relationships, think of the kind of storytelling that's spatial, right? You in order to build, or in order to cut things off, or to limit areas, or to shape spaces, you have to put structures in place. So of course, back then, those structures were made from, and even now too, but those structures were, made from concrete. But even before then, before concrete was invented, so to speak, it was mounds of dirt, right? You use the earth itself to shape spaces and housing and all of that. And so the first kind of storytelling that we're going to be talking about is spatial storytelling. How do you use that in the work from home culture? Well, the first example that I'm going to give to you is, and let me just scroll it. So let's talk about spatial for a little bit. You want to create a spatial sense of where you are, especially in your home. And for everybody, your environment is different. Your space, the access even to that space in your home is different for everyone. There are different variables, and we'll talk about variables at the end, but there's so many ways to talk about this and to approach this. But I'm going to submit to you that the most important thing here, and let me just go ahead and so the most important thing here is to understand that you're going to need a space, and by you creating a space, you are telling a story. Now, I know that you're probably like, well, I don't understand. Well, the basic definition of what a story is the recounting or the articulation of a set of events that are sequential, that allows you to have, a beginning, a middle, an end, and there should be some sort of resolve, right? There's usually a setup. Right. There's usually a context, and then there's usually then a conflict, right? There's a problem that needs to be solved, and then the conflict has a resolution. And then in the middle of all of that, there is a character. That's you, the individual. Here's the thing. You are the character in this story. In this spatial story, you're the character. And every day, or once a week, however it is that your work from home culture schedule or, is set up, you are in a context, which should be the space. You're solving a problem, and you should come to a resolution every day. right? For those of us that work day in and day out, every day you need to be solving a particular challenge or particular problem. Now, I'm not saying that life is filled with problems and you need to solve your problems. What I am saying, because that is the truth, but what I am saying is simply that when you're showing up to tackle a particular task. Think of those tasks. If you don't want to use the word problem, use challenge. If you don't want to use challenge, then use task. But there are things that need to be done. The first thing that you want to be able to do in understanding this work from home space, because listen, for a lot of us, it's the dining table has become the new space. For a lot of, not just for parents, but for kids too, like for school, right? How is it that you guys can create the space that's necessary for people to come together to do both work and school, or you have to shape that space and create those boundaries. And so that's the first thing that we're going to talk about is the way that you do that. And the most important way that I would submit to you is by establishing. So that's the first E here, establishing boundaries. And you establish boundaries by focusing on, and let me just go ahead and delete this whole thing altogether now. I think I just removed the whole surprise of this whole thing. By establishing relationships. It seems weird. It sounds like it's disconnected. But when you think about if my relationships, we're talking about in the home now, if my relationships are directly connected to the space that I'm in, then what do I need to create in order for that to happen? So here's some tips. And so for those of you who may not have felt your most productive, one of the biggest things is to find a consistent place every day to show up. So I think a few years ago, when I first found my niche of like where I wanted to be, and I realized that the bedroom is not going to work, is, I found a space that was like, it's literally like 9 by 3, like 3 foot by 9 foot. It's like a rectangle where I took a room divider. And that was the first step, was instead of just having an open place, I realized that I needed to section it off in order to have, for me, to sculpt a spot that I know that I can go to, kind of wrap around to go into that place. And that was the place that I would do the work. And when I'm done, I'd come back out. And one of the biggest challenges, and for those of you that don't know or that you will experience, one of the biggest challenges with sculpting this space is to make sure that you respect the space that you have decided on. Because if you don't, then others won't either. And by others, I'm talking about those who are in the house with you. Like, because if you don't create that space as a sanctuary almost, where this is the place where your productivity matters most, then it's going to be difficult. You're going to entertain conversations, or if there's something that needs to be done at this time, or like your attention will be pulled if you choose to not stick to not just the schedule. We'll talk about that too. There's a habitual storytelling, but if you decide that that space isn't as sacred for work like it should be. Now, things have shifted for a lot of individuals who, especially parents, you have kids where you might now be sharing the same place. And by doing that, you still now need to come up with some sort of system where you can still share the same space, but boundaries are still created. It's very interesting that if you take the opportunity and if you choose to just settle down, buckle in, and choose not to either entertain conversations or whenever the phone rings, or when there's a notification. And speaking of which, let me go ahead and put mine on do not disturb here, just in case. Like, these are all of the things that vying for your attention, especially now that you're in a place that you would call home. So it's, in a sense, you would have to find the sanctuary within the sanctuary, because for a lot of us, we would leave, go to work, and then you'd come back, and home would be the bubble. But now you need to find a work environment within the home space, and you have to separate the two. And by doing that, you can establish also healthy relationships. So how does that connect? Well, if you start to respect the space that you're in, like I said, then the individuals around you will also do that too. So these are very important things that you need to do. So like, for instance, if you're in a place where there could be potentially a lot of noise and you don't have to record or, do some live streaming and things like what a lot of us have to do, noise cancellation headphones is important. Like, there are ways that you can sculpt out your space without feeling as if you are, in a sense, dominating the entire house, because you aren't the only person living there. Now, if you are, that's for a different story. And I think it's a little bit easier for those of you that are living by yourself. But for a lot of us, that's not the case. And so by doing things that allows you to preserve the sanctity of where you're working, but also to an extent, not be a hindrance per se on the livelihoods of everybody else, because everybody else has to use, that the houses, everyone else's as well, then you would need to be very careful on how to create that balance, right? Another thing, which is definitely something that I have to continue to work on, is how much time do you work? Because it's challenging for those of us who do work a lot, right? Where you almost kind of work all the way up until your bedtime, and then that's it, and then you wake up and then you start it all over again, right? And so you also need to figure out times of when it is that, if you're even using the place where people are eating, what are the times that you have to clean things off, boundaries, clean things off, and now use that same space. That spatial storytelling now switches from work, and it switches to now fellowship. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind. So I'm going to put in here that there are different kinds of spaces, and let's see here if I can make this bigger for us. There are different spaces that you can look at, right? So there's definitely work. There is, I'm going to put here eating, but yeah, eating. Fellowship sounds like, too. I just make that eating. And depending on where you are, I mean, recreation. There's also, I'm just thinking of other areas, because it really depends on where you are. Like for some of you, you do have the space in your room to do both. Recreation then needs to definitely be separate, especially for those who have a hard time doing the work-life balance or integration. And so I'm just going to keep these three for now. So work, eating, fellowship. What are the spaces that you're using, and what is the narrative? What is the story that you have to tell yourself visually, spatially, to create the expectation of the sequential events that are going to happen by people looking at the thing and saying, oh, it's dinner time. Oh, they're working right now. Oh, like you and here's the thing, it has to be consistent, which leads to the next point. We're talking about now storytelling in the form of water, right? So we talked about establishing boundaries, and by establishing boundaries in the relationship, you can begin to scope the space itself, right? So keep that in mind. It's not just creating getting a room divider, getting, some sort of thing it's more to it than that. The true story is behind the relationships that you need to now manage in a different way by establishing expectations, establishing boundaries. Okay, here's the next piece. I'm just going to move to the next one here. So we had earth. Now let's take a look at water, guys. So with water, we're looking at systems. When you think of water, you're thinking of like fluidity. You're thinking of consistency. You're thinking of the movement that is just ever flowing unless there's a breach. Unless something immediately cuts it off, and then the water stops and then the flow no longer happens. That's what water is, right? It's designed that way. So the best way to describe that is by using systems. So what does that look like? Well, you execute routines. This is now playing into habitual storytelling. And why is habitual storytelling important? Well, your boundaries really won't make sense. Right? Your boundaries in the earth side, like establishing those relationships, you really won't create effective the expectations of other people if you don't consistently have the routine. So I'll give you a great example. So like for right now, my routine has shifted. Instead of it being in the morning, a lot of the work that I do is like afternoon to like late night. And so the cycle repeats itself where I'll wake up later in the morning because I've went to sleep later at night. Now, one day I'll get to the whole early morning thing again, but right now that's just the routine that I've got and it works for me. The point is you have to figure out specific things that are going to be put in place to make sure that you're accomplishing your goal. Now that's important Because oftentimes what we want to do is we want to be goals oriented. We want to say, hey, listen, I choose by the end of this month or by the end of this quarter to achieve goal A, goal B, and goal C, but yet you don't have the system in place. What I'm suggesting is that you go ahead, and here's the next E. We talked about establishing relationships. The next one, or establishing boundaries. The next one is executing. So this is something that you have to do, yet again, routines. By executing routines, you're doing the same thing day in and day out. If you day in and day out show up to the same place, you are now establishing the expectation that this is the place that you're going from a work from home culture. This is the place that you're showing up for work. And for a lot of us, you have to also dress up for work. Now, listen, I think it was like after month 4 or month 5, because I thought, we all thought that, maybe 6 months and this thing was going to be over as far as COVID-19, the pandemic, everything would kind of get back to normal, so to speak. When it first broke, we're thinking, okay, you know what, maybe half the year, and then we'll get back. And a lot of us, we're still dressing up. Now, there are a lot of people who they can afford not to dress up, but some of us can, and I'm one of them. So I went from dressing up, with the collar shirt to the khakis to, listen, the basketball shorts, the comfy Crocs, you know what I'm saying? And just a more comfortable tee. Why? Because I realized, okay, if I'm going to be in this place longer than I anticipated, and I have the leverage or the freedom to be able to be a little bit more relaxed, especially with doing some of the communication, and I'm still getting paid the same, then you know what? Professional look, professional background, the professional feel, and you can still have a little bit more of a relaxed, a relaxed setup, or you just feel a little bit more relaxed and comfortable because you're going to be in the same place for a long time. Yeah, why not? And so for a lot of us, we've shifted how we've even changed. Now, here's the thing: when I say how we changed, how we've dressed. But for many of us, we need to keep getting dressed, because for a lot of individuals, putting on the clothes is part of the work routine for them. Now, I know for a lot of people, especially back in the day, they said, the work from home culture, one of the benefits is that, you get to, wake up whenever you want, and you get to dress however you want. But truth be told, if you don't have a consistent routine, what's going to happen is that you won't be able to have a system in place for consistent revenue. That's just what it is. Right. So here it is. And let me give you a great example. So right now, I know that because of the later working that I have, like the shift from working late versus working early, or starting early versus starting later, there is a little bit of trade-off from the individuals who are highly not just productive, but active, especially like online, perhaps maybe in the let's say using LinkedIn and social space, where morning to early afternoon is where the sweet spot could be for a lot of things like posts, engagement, and things like that. So there could be a trade-off, which means that if the system is broken, right? If I realize, okay, hold on, I'm missing out now because of the system that I'm using, then it should inform me switching so that I can capitalize on what I'm trying to do. Make your system work for what you're trying to do. Don't just have a routine just because you think you should have a routine. Now, stick with me. I think it's good to just have those kind of practices and disciplines in general. But what I am saying is that you should have a why behind it. It's very easy to do a lot of things from rote memory, right? And not really understand the deeper reason or meaning behind it. Now, does everything have to be deep and have a meaning? No, that's for our next one, which is dealing with wind and the existential storytelling. But what I am telling you is that you should have a solid enough reason for why you're doing a particular routine, so that when it is time that you get tired of it or frustrated, or you're just kind of like, oh my goodness, why do I have to do this again? You can answer that why. I hate to say, what's your why? But what's your why for that particular routine? Right. So for instance, I remember when I invested in, a device that helps me to be more active, the why was, okay, if I invest in something that helps me to keep an exercise routine, then I will be more healthy. Then I can reach the muscle gain, not measurement, the muscle gain achievement, like the number that I have, that I'm trying to achieve. Like, these are specific whys that I have. Well, in order to get to that, you got to exercise. In order to exercise, there are particular kinds of exercises that you need to do. And even with those particular kinds of exercises, you have to do it consistently. Oh, well, I've got something to remind me. Now, do you need an actual device? No, you can have an alarm clock. on your phone that says, hey, time to get up. But you should know for you what works for you. Part of my system is using particular tools to help me with reaching that goal. And I think that's where a lot of us may fall short, is that we are trying to fit in goals, or sorry, fit in tools where the tool isn't necessarily needed, or you're inflating, you're doing too much, you're doing the most to try to get a goal done when all you needed was just one thing, if anything at all, to get it done. You need the system in place first, and then the tools, the resources, and all of that will inform what you should get in order. Or let me back up. The system will inform the tools, the resources that you need in order to make the goal, in order to achieve the goal. So establish boundaries, sculpting the expectations of your relationships, which lends to spatial storytelling. I know it's weird to say, well, how can that work? Because when you think about it, all storytelling deals with people. So you need more than just a room divider, more than just an empty table, more than just a space that nobody's using in the house. Like, it's going to be more than just that. What you want to do is you want to be able to establish, especially, here it is, especially for those of you who may not have the luxury of using a consistent space on a weekly, monthly, or just indefinitely, you are going to have communication. You're going to have to talk about an agreement. You're going to have to sit down with individuals and say, okay, these are the times, and these are the, here's what I suggest, that if you are that kind of person, if you are methodical, but others may not think it's not that deep, I would still say go through the practice and at least have something, have a schedule, have something, because eventually, sooner or later, it's going to come up. Sooner or later, there's going to be a question of timelines, or just schedules, or, conflicts, and kill all of that by just having a specific thing set up. And if the specific thing is set up on a habitual basis, which is habitual storytelling based on a routine, you kind of feed into the boundaries that are expected. Okay, so that's the one for systems. So here, I'm going to put here, like, what are some of the systems that we can think of? Well, obviously, um, I'll give you a great example. So, like, one of the systems that I use right now is a part of, like, with the LinkedIn, like reaching out to a certain amount of people per day. And then along with that, though, I've broken down, and here it is. I have a setup where every day I need to connect, I need to create. By all means, please use this. This is something that I use, but by all means, and I need to consume. So I've got to read something that's germane to my profession. I got to read something that's relevant. Social media does not count unless there's something on social media, that's including medium.com. It needs to directly connect to, okay, the workspace. Remember, we're talking about work from home culture. We're not just talking about, home life. No, we're talking about working from home. So it's got to be something that directly connects to the workspace. I got to create something. Now, it doesn't have to be directly to what I have consumed. It would be great. It would be great if, as soon as I, consume something, I create something immediately, but that's not always the case. But the next thing here is I got to connect. So for me, this connect piece is reaching out to prospects, reaching out to individuals who may not even know it yet, but need business storytelling coaching, need training, need consulting, but they won't know that I got what they need unless I reach out. So my system includes these 3 C's. Now, do I hit the mark every single day? Ideally, not every single day. Some days, connecting is all you do. Some days, you take the whole day to create something. Now, some days, consuming, but you got to be careful with this whole thing, because you got to be really intentional. If you consume it all day, the question is, what have you been consuming all day that's going to take you all day to do it? Now, this has happened sometimes. Like, I'll give you a great example, like me rereading the value proposition design book. Like, I use this a lot for my business. Sometimes I'm trying to refresh my memory to revive a deeper understanding of a particular part of this thing, which deals with storytelling. Then it could take some time, right? But the point is, you don't want to consume something and not create something with it. Okay, so that's the next piece. So we talked about the earth, we talked about the water, which is habitual storytelling. Now let's talk about the wind. I don't know why wind is clear, but We'll just we'll just go with it. So with the wind, we are dealing with, drum roll please, changes. What kind of changes? Variability. I mean, that's just another word for changes, right? Things that just happen that you don't expect to happen in your WFH, your work from home environment. You better believe that changes can occur. I can testify to that. What is this about? Existential storytelling. Let's recap. All right. So, first, we talked about the earth kind of storytelling, the boundary shaping storytelling. It's called spatial storytelling. And the way that you can create spatial storytelling is by managing your relationships. It doesn't seem directly connected until you realize storytelling is about people. And if I can manage the boundaries with people, then if I set up a room divider or a place to stay and other people are aware of it, including myself, then I can now create a mutual and an expected space where I can work. I'm telling you, what would require that is communication. I guess through that, we'll talk about some pieces. How do I do that? I don't know how to do that. The next one is water. Water is fluid. Water flows. Water is consistent when it's running, but it stops when there's something that's blocking it. It's the system, right? So we're dealing now with habitual storytelling. If you tell something frequently to yourself or to someone over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, eventually it will stick. Well, how do you do that? You execute a routine. So the first one is establishing boundaries. The second one is executing a routine. Here's the third one. Embrace variability. Embrace it. Know and understand that things are going to shift. As a matter of fact, it changes even more when you become more intentional on making sure that, okay, this is the space, this is the time, I'm going to get this done. And guess what? That's when the wind starts to blow in different directions that you didn't even consider. Variability, and here it is. And I want you to get this, guys. I want you to get this. Variability, changes occur more frequently when you become more intentional with your system. I guess now is a great time to start sketching some stuff out here, because you're probably wondering, why is it that whenever I decide to be intentional about building something, that now things want to shift? Can I explain to you that things have always shifted? You were just the inconsistent person. You were inconsistent. You didn't have the system. So everything that was changing, all of the variables around you it just felt like normality. But now that you've decided to establish a level of consistency, repeatability, you now start to be heightened. Your awareness begins to pick up, oh, wow, there are some changes that I was not even anticipating or ready for. Why is this like this? Why does this happen? Why does it have to be this way? It was always that way. You just didn't realize it. I'll give you a great example. So here it is with existential storytelling. You want to be able to take a look at now the changes that are occurring and to look at it from a bigger perspective. The word existential, it's a fancy word. I'll define it this way because there's a whole philosophical worldview behind it called existentialism. But think of existential storytelling as the object lesson in the ordinary. What's the why? What's the big picture as to what has happened? So recently, in my own work from home environment, the kitchen had to be redone, the bathroom had to be redone. Things that were impacting or even impeding, like the noise levels and things like that dealt with recording and all of that, accessibility to parts of the house. Like, listen, there are a lot of changes. And then you have to step back and ask yourself, well, okay, there may have been some major changes, but what have been some micro inconveniences that still occurred, but I wasn't aware of it because I didn't have a routine that was set up. So, part of the reason why a lot of the timing for me has also shifted as far as me working later was because when the construction was happening, it was easier to work later in the evenings. And so the system adapted. So an existential storytelling for this would be, well, you know what? As I look at this now, as things were shifting, as things were being remodeled, things were being changed and fixed in the home, I had to look and say, how can I apply that to my personal life? Existentially, what is being remodeled or what needs to be changed in my personal life? Now, you're probably thinking, oh, you're going too deep. It's not that serious. No, no, no. When you get frustrated or when you feel as if you're being hugely impeded or inconvenienced because there are things that you're supposed to do, but you can't do because there are things that are out of your control, you now have to ask yourself, okay, what is the deeper understanding? How can I take this thing and, in a sense, flip it around so that when I do see this inconvenience, I don't see it no longer, I see it no longer as a problem as much as an opportunity. So I said, you know what? Perhaps this is a season where there are particular things that started to break down, piping and things like that, for considerable amount of years. Things that started to break down, and we were fortunate to become aware of those things starting to break down, and we're able to fix it in time before things got worse. And perhaps maybe this is a season of just change, season of newness, where there are things in your life, or there are things, if I make it personal, in my life that had to be totally revamped, totally removed, painful, right? Separation or mending of things personally, where if it didn't get fixed then, and this is a fixing, right? The fixing comes with the removal, the fixing comes with the shifting and pulling out the rusty parts and all of that stuff, because if that doesn't get fixed by the removal and by the reconstruction, there are other parts of the home, and in this case, in the personal life, that would be affected. So perhaps this is a season of change. This is a season of growth. See, if you start to think of things like this existentially within your very own work from home environment, it becomes a little bit more livable. It becomes a little bit more, you become more optimistic, because you then start to see, okay, you know what, let me just kind of block that here so we can still now just focus on changes. You can start to see that variability is a good thing. Nothing is wrong with having changes that are occurring. As a matter of fact, you are called to embrace it. Okay, embrace those changes. So what could be some examples of some variability? So I just mentioned here, construction could definitely be one where, it's noise level. There could also be, for those of you that have them, kids, pets, like maybe something, maybe one of your kids are sick, maybe, you got to take the dog for a walk, right? But even then, habitual storytelling, right? You'll know when to take your pets out. Like you see how it's all interconnected. But that's also definitely one of them, like variabilities. Kids. So what are some other internet? Like sometimes maybe it just stops working, or power outages, and yeah, there's so many types, and there's some in here that I probably didn't even mention. But the point is, there's a lot, and then here it is that you will have just normal, just normal home dudes. Like sometimes there's just some things that just has to get done. That's not even connected to work, right? So here are just some of the changes that will occur. The variability. Your goal here, your job here, is to embrace those things. But you can't embrace it if you don't have a consistent routine. You don't even realize it. You don't even realize variability if you yourself are variable, so are a variable, I should say. So how do you address that? Using existential storytelling. All right, guys. So here are the three again. Let's just take a look at these. We're looking at okay, well those that's it. Let's go back to the beginning here. So we're looking at earth, water, and wind, the kinds of storytelling that you can tell yourself in the work from home culture. Okay, so it's not the once upon a time kind of storytelling. We're using storytelling as the setting up of sequential events that allows you to have a beginning, middle, and an end. There needs to be resolve in these, or for these three areas. And here's the first one. And we just doing a recap here. The first one is that we talked about earth, which is you creating boundaries spatially. So just think about using earth mounds like how they used to do back in the day for creating homes and, separating water from, or plant life or animals or even people from each other. Creating these, they used earth. And so you are doing spatial storytelling by effectively establishing boundaries. It impacts your relationships. And there are different kinds of spaces that you can impact those relationships. We talked about work. That's the first one. Work from home, like that is what we're talking about today. But then there's also eating dinner. Like if you're using the same place for that, then you need to create and have even more communication because of that, right? Recreation is another, where once again, if you're in a place where it's a shared space and you need to be able to share that, or you need to be able to have, once again, more communication, because now your work time is over and now their playtime begins, or even for you, so that also though leads to the water type of storytelling. Habitual, it's fluid, it's systematic. You can create those earth boundaries with relationships by establishing systems. The three that I use that are daily now for me and even weekly is: who should I connect with professionally? We're talking about work from home here. What should I be creating, and what should I consume that's directly impacting my business? Okay, those three things together for me tie into my system. And like I said, sometimes you may have a whole day of creation. Sometimes there is a day of just consuming. And you got to be careful with that, right? Because you want to be able to do something with it, even if it's developing an outline, something meaningful with, consuming that amount of content. Because, you don't want to binge, you don't want to become obese off of just information and not do anything with it. And then last is, oh, before we go to the last one, executing routines. Like that's what this is about. So think of a routine as a particular action that's designed to get the bigger task done. And that's what a system is. A system is designed to achieve the goal. It's one thing to say, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to lose 25 pounds by May 1st. Like that's a goal. And it's a terrible way to frame a goal, because it should be specific, measurable, achievable, relative, or realistic and timely. So you may have a timely part, you may have the specific part, but there's some other pieces. Is it realistic? The point is simply, what I'm saying is this: that if you, or for me, it's not losing, it's gaining, right? Like, by this time, like I'm trying to get, and so for me, it's not realistic. 25, what I would have to do to hit, what I'm saying? So anyway, but there needs to be a system in place in order for that to happen. So what are you eating? What are you consuming? How often are you exercising? What are the exercises that you're doing? So now there's a system in place of diet, nutrition, and exercise, muscle building that will help you to get to the goal. And so that's what we're looking at when we're talking about executing routines. The routine is doing the thing that's going to help you to actually do the thing, the bigger thing. So one routine might be making sure that you set up office and sit down by 11 o'clock in the morning. Like that would be your thing, right? That's the routine. You show up and you sit down in the space that you're supposed to be doing work in. And for a lot of people who, do the late night, late morning routine, that's probably what you end up doing anyways. Like you start like late morning, early afternoon, like that is your space. And so for those of us that, do early morning, which I'm not on that tip yet, hopefully I'll get there. But right now I'm working with the system that's working with me. It's like 4:30 or whatever it is. And then like, that's the space, right? Whatever your thing is, make sure that you are doing it consistently. That's what habitual storytelling is about. Lastly is the win. And here we're talking about embracing variability. Okay, so you are embracing changes. Here it is that now that you're consistent, changes you are more aware of. You now become so heightened and sensitive to changes because you've been intentional about showing up or about establishing things consistently. And so you may think, everything is an inconvenience now, and everything is irking you. No, it's always been there. But now you have decided to be the fluid, consistent stream of water. And now everything around you is like the wind, just blowing the stream. And you're what I'm suggesting is that you articulate what those anticipated changes, or even what those changes are right now, but name what they could be in general. Normal house duties, internet, Power outages, kids, pets, construction. Like, what are the particular things that you do, or sorry, what are the particular things that you should expect to happen? And then maybe even things that you didn't expect, but so put a miscellaneous. Embrace the variability, and then you use the art of existential storytelling, the why of the thing, and try to apply the deeper meaning as best as you can. Don't overthink it or over philosophize, but think about how what is happening on the outside has a greater and existential meaning. How does this relate to me on a personal level or even on a professional level? So, when I talked to you about the consistent construction that's been happening over the last few months, one of the things that I thought about was season of change. And as uncomfortable, as inconvenient as it is, that's also how change for the person, for the body, for the mind, for the soul can be as well. Or even though it's like, why now? And why does that have to take this long? However, at the same time, it also is helping you to grow. It's improving it. It's preventing certain things from getting worse if you actually deal with it now. So anyway, that is what we are, or what we have dealt with, guys. So earth, water, wind, what you want to do is you want to either establish boundaries for relationships, spatial storytelling. You want to be able to execute routines, which is your habitual storytelling, by creating systems. And then you want to embrace variability, changes, with existential storytelling. All right, guys. So that. And I don't know if there's anybody who is live or who is watching, but if you are and you've got a question, by all means, now's the time to go ahead and shoot your question for me, and I'll be more than willing to answer it. But if there aren't any, yeah, if you're watching this later, go ahead. This is it's online, so you can go ahead and just post your questions, and I'll just answer it then. And I'm definitely looking forward. I'm looking forward to just exploring other ways of how storytelling can impact, especially those of us in the work from home culture. Right? Remember, storytelling is not just about once upon a time. It's not just the Disney movies, or the action or the thrillers, the suspense genres that we catch on Netflix or Disney Plus. Or no, it's more than that, and it's more than just sharing a brand message. And it's more than helping to create a change management initiative within an organization. You can actually use storytelling right in your home, the work from home culture. And truth be told, a lot of us with our work from home culture is still tied. We are still tied to an organization, unless you are a freelancer or you're an entrepreneur. And even then, that is your organization. We're tied to an organization that isn't ours. And so you can very well tell these three kinds of storytellings that won't necessarily impact how the organization runs, but it impacts how you perform. And with that, it does also benefit your organization. So, anyway, guys, that is all. And if there aren't any questions or any follow up, yeah, when you're watching this later, go ahead and chime in, and yeah, I'll go ahead and do my best to answer any questions that you have. But until then, see you in the next one.